Welcome back to chapter 3 of In Search of Deeper Learning, the quest to remake the American high school. Chapter 3 is titled No Excuses, Schools, Benefits, and Trade-Offs. And the three of us, have been having a conversation, and it definitely seems like there's some benefits and some trade-offs. And as usual, we don't completely agree. So a couple things to kick us off. One thing is, I think we all felt that there's this phrase on page 98, just right away. It's not even necessarily about no excuses schools. It's just a key reminder for all of us that student-centered learning is not necessarily deeper learning. So we just like we know a project doesn't, just because it's a project doesn't make it good, and just because it's student-centered doesn't mean it's actually deeper learning. That we got to get below the surface to see what's going on. So that really kind of, I think, is a theme in No Excuses High. So I'm going to toss it out to Hiram or Stephen to say, what was one of your key takeaways, or what was one of the key items that you would like to talk about in this chapter?
Yeah, there's a lot here. And I know, like you said, Phil, we were just in the middle of having we were already getting into it before we started the recording of all the kind of interesting points here. And I think things to really wrestle with, because to your point, there is definitely I think a good reason for the Real World Academy folks to go through this chapter and like wrestle with something that looks so different than what they're thinking of doing. And then really pushing on, well, what is deeper learning going to look like at Real World Academy? Do you all buy the mastery, identity, creativity as sort of the core, the course components of what you all want learning to be? Because when you look at a school like this, you might say, wow, there's a lot of mastery. There's a lot of mastery. I guess there's not a lot of creativity, and there's maybe not a lot of identity. So but at the same time, it also is possibly a good reflection on what schools think they should look like, right? Because I feel like a lot of this is what they're trying to make something that would approximate like the ideal traditional school, right? All the students are in their seats, everyone's watching the teacher, everyone's paying attention. And there was a great quote somewhere, which is the students were competent, but not passionate. I have to find that exact quote. And I just feel like, some people would argue like, yeah, this is exactly kind of what school as we currently think of it should look like, or is supposed to look like. The last thing I'll say, because this is just a thing that I find so important in the entire book, is the idea of symmetry. On page 101, or I guess it's 100 and 101, there's a point where they say, they were finding that the students who were, this is at the bottom of page 100, the students that got into college, right, after going through this rigorous system, were frequently struggling with the open-ended nature of higher education. And I just think that there is a lot to pick apart here in the chapter, in this model of, the students are highly, highly controlled. The teachers and administrators are highly, highly controlled. And so when they're put in these other situations for, needing to have more autonomy, they struggle, right? Mm-hmm. So,
Harry, what are your thoughts on that, Harry?
Well, and this gets to the whole point of the intent of the school. So based on their intent, they are successful by the measures that they have selected. But I think by removing the student from the equation, and to a larger degree, the teachers from the equation, they're not giving them the skills to be successul at the next level. And so that's where I think, and that's where Real World Academy kind of, because we're saying, let's think about the skills that we want our students to have to be successful after they leave us. And this school is not interested in that.
Yeah, I found that certainly, the phrases about the system that what I say, it could have been written by Stalin on 107, it is most essential that an equity-oriented school leader minimize random variation and maximize consistency of experience across classrooms. Well, obviously baked in is no individuality clearly by the student or the teacher there, because it would be inequitable. And that's interesting. I want to talk about that. One thing I'll point out is near the end of the chapter, they talk about this recognition, and the one credit I'll give them is that they were a growing and maturing and evolving school, in the sense that they recognized that they had nailed mastery, but possibly at the expense of something else. And they introduced projects, remember? But then the student take was, our projects aren't very good because we only do them once and then present them. Everything else we do multiple times until we master it. So again, the project felt other than, it wasn't incorporated. It was like this extra thing. Okay, here's some creativity, dust. You know?
And it was done at the end.
Exactly. And so even the students kind of called BS on it. They're like,
yeah.
Talk a little bit about this equity piece. I think that's super interesting. Is it true that without a hardcore system that is consistent across classrooms, or in our case pods, that you would introduce inequity?
I would argue, again, that goes back to the definition of equity. For me, I mean, this is my own personal definition. Equity is around getting students what they need to be successful. Now, they could argue that we're doing that because of the high degree of scaffolding, but I would beg to differ, because you're giving the same thing to every single kid. And so how is that equitable? Because different kids are going to need different things, and they're in different spaces in the continuum, just like teacher development are in different places and stages of things.
That almost seems more equal than equitable, doesn't it?
Yeah,
like they're ensuring equal, which again, many parents want. They want just the same chance as every other kid.
Well, you know, I don't know if anyone else has come across this, but the guy who used to run the Finnish school system, Pasi Sahlberg, he has this really great quote. I don't think it's in this book. I'll have to find it. He talks about how in America, we're always looking for ways to hold teachers accountable and not make them responsible, right? So, and he frames it as responsibility is something that you give someone responsibility up front, right? And so like in Finland, they give their teachers a ton of responsibility, but they also give them a bunch of training, right? And they make it a very highly expert professional career. Teaching is like extremely hard to get into. And so then the accountability piece is minimized, right? And it's the same sort of feeling here where it's like, do you want to give your students a lot of responsibility up front, train them, bring them up to speed, and then let them be more creative? Or do you want to hold them accountable at the end over and over and over again? Standardized tests.
And I'd say the system is the latter, because again, the other piece that jumped out at me was that interaction between the principal and the teacher on pages 127 to 129, where the principal is just drilling down with the teacher and putting the teacher on their heels. And, well, why did you do it that way? Why were you doing it that way? And the teacher didn't do anything wrong. But the principal, I think, interestingly, and I would say appropriately, was saying, if this was your goal, you didn't do it. You didn't do it appropriately. You could have done better. And it took the teacher a while to get there. That interaction, I think, rarely, if ever, happens between a principal and a teacher, in a sense of coaching to that deep level of what were you really trying to achieve, and how could you have done that better? And that sense is a sense of accountability to me.
It is, but I think a lot of the structure in this system, to me, seems to be based on power and fear.
Oh, and doing it right.
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 Is there a single way?
Right. And the way to know which the right way is ask the person above you on the ladder.
Right, which is what makes this interaction kind of interesting, because I think if you tweaked it, I mean, what do they call it here? They call it, this is a lesson observation, right? And then there's like an interview with the principal and the teacher afterwards. Because I agree with you, Phil, insofar as like, this is a really substantive, it's like useful feedback, right, for the teacher. And it's useful to actually walk the teacher through these thought processes, but frame this as a formative coaching experience, as opposed to a evaluative accountability experience. Those are they might look very similar, but they're going to feel a lot different to the teacher. And the same thing is true with students, right? Like if a student knows that like the evaluation or the whatever you want to call this interaction is not like some final judgment, but it's just one step on the road to improvement, that's like a whole different kind of, feel.
It's interesting. We're using the term mastery, and it is mastery of the content is what the focus has been here, not mastery of learning how to learn.
Right.
Right.
And
yeah. And those are two, so we have to be careful with our terms.
that other piece that seems to be very lacking because of the structure, because of the system, and the lack of ability to innovate and do all of those things. There's no joy of learning, and why learning can be enjoyable and you can grow and learn from that.
Which we saw in the college going numbers, right? Everybody goes to college, but half of them or so were not finishing because they didn't know how to learn. They couldn't translate those skills.
Right.
We've reached our time. Anything else that you guys like to add?
Yes, one more thing that I think was lacking, and that is that concept of relationships, and what this shows how important relationships between the teachers, relationships between the teachers and the students, and amongst the students. It was not there.
Remember the part where they're celebrating, they're doing a goodbye party, and one of the teachers says, "How come we never celebrate the good things about people when they're here?"
Yeah.
Wow.
Exactly.
That was.
Well, to that point, the last thing I want to add here, and I think it relates to one of the comments from last week. I think I know Kristen and Kimber both commented, and I forget. I think one of you made a really fascinating point about foregrounding at Real World Academy, foregrounding teachers' passions, right? And saying like, well, what if we started with the teachers' passions and then tried to like use those things to fill in, like figure out where the standard content goes, right? That's kind of a system, right? That's a very alien system to what this school represented and to what most schools represent. So I just want to throw it out there that like, maybe we can think of a system that does that. I don't have the answer on that, but like, how can we have a system that foregrounds passion, that foregrounds relationships, like Hariam said, and doesn't put those at the very bottom of the list?
Good final point. Maybe it's not the fact, maybe the bad thing isn't that there's a system, it's that it's their system that they were focused on. And a system, because again, I think the benefits we saw was, it feels like there should be a system, but this is a kind of scary one. So, okay, great last comment, Stephen. That was, I think, definitely we need to chew on that one. Okay, thanks everyone, and we'll see you in chapter 4.